Mercedes has one of the biggest challenges to complete in 2024, catching up to Red Bull, and it seems like although their car has been totally revamped, they will face a lot of obstacles in completing such a big step at once. The fans are expecting nothing less than a fight for wins and potentially even a championship-contending campaign now that the W15 looks nothing like its predecessors. But whether or not this will turn out to be the truth, time will tell. What has been revealed by Wolff is that the hopes are not that high, and considering that Red Bull has adopted a similar philosophy to Mercedes' previous years, could the Brackley-based team fall into its own humiliation trap? And if so, who would be to blame for the lack of success? Mercedes wants to start the 2024 season with a complete overhaul of the car, and it's not an understatement when we say that the W15 looks astonishingly good and different. All of the aerodynamic surfaces look different, the side pod design is reminiscent of that of the RB19, and more importantly, the drivers feel very motivated to get back to their winning ways. But according to Wolff, the step that Red Bull made in the past couple of years is not something that should be looked at as it didn't happen. And being so far ahead does give you a lot of perks to put a halt on their rivals' progress. Adding to this matter, Wolff said, "When you fall, you get back up," and that is what I have learned most in the last 3 years. It's about the ability to recognise the learning when we fail to meet our objectives, and this is the key to long-term success. We hate losing, and that drives us, but that does not mean that we can't enjoy the challenge we have in front of us, working through our problems and what we need to do as a team. That is all part of the development. This is definitely not the first time that Wolff has approached this entire situation with a bit of a pessimistic view because of what happened in the past couple of years and how his team failed to build a competitive car after building two polar opposites of cars, one with tons of rear downforce and one with none of it, and a very strong front end. But after looking at Mercedes' front wing, it's obvious that the team has worked a lot on their air distribution towards the rear of the car, because quite logically everything starts from the front of the car, and if you have disturbance of the air from this point onwards, then you can't expect any aerodynamic gains in the middle and the rear of the car. But nonetheless, Wolff is adamant that the team needs to remain realistic about beating a team that has been narrating the tempo for such a long period, adding, "On one hand, you need to be realistic about the odds of beating a team that is a fair chunk ahead under these regulations and who got things right over the last 2 seasons, whilst we have not. There are no miracles in the sport. On the other hand, our ambition is strong. It is Red Bull and a very successful car that are the benchmark we are aiming to beat. I do not know when that will happen. We do not have any crystal ball, but we will know soon enough how far ahead they are and the task in front of us." Now, there is this one scenario that many fans seem to underestimate due to the dominance of Red Bull. The Austrian team could understand things wrong as well. The pressure is much more on them than the rest of the grid because they're the ones that have invented all of the technologies in the current era. But now that the rest of the grid have more or less copied it and iterated it their own way, Red Bull is forced to come up with something else in order to keep the advantage on their home turf. This might be one of the reasons why the Austrian team has chosen to chase the philosophy that Red Bull has deemed to be a failure, and the factual situation stands as it is. The zero-pod design was theoretically the best possible iteration of the rules because it enabled the car to have a lot more rear downforce by minimizing all of the side effects. However, Mercedes has gone in this direction to an extreme, and it was obvious from day one that the amount of downforce the car had was not controllable, which is more or less a failure of its own. This is why Newey believes that if his team is able to successfully implement the design on their own, we will likely see a zero-pod Red Bull car that would definitely rub some salt in Mercedes' faces. But again, it's not like Newey is an all-time genius that hasn't gotten things wrong. He was beaten at McLaren before, and in the turbo hybrid era, it was Mercedes who set the benchmark for competitiveness. So with all due respect to the genius mind of Newey, it's not like this design guarantees a lot of success for Red Bull. Mercedes thought the same when they introduced it for the first time, so we'll wait and see until April to witness the zero-pod design in action. Yet Mercedes choosing to go in their own direction has its own negative sides as well. For example, the team has to sacrifice other areas in order to fix what's most important, which is the gearbox and the chassis of the car. These two elements have been dubbed the priorities of the Silver Arrows because without a proper stable platform, it makes zero sense to upgrade something that won't contribute to the team's success. But by doing so, Mercedes was unable to spend a huge amount of their resources on the majority of the car, which is poised by the financial restrictions of the budget cap. And when talking about this, Allison said, "A new chassis and gearbox was standard for each year pre-budget cap. The latter usually forces you to choose, but there are teams like us who have opted to change both. There is no doubt that having a new outer casing of the gearbox and at the same time having a new chassis are two big projects that take up a part of our financial means. This means that in other parts of the car, we have not pushed as much development." Not pushing as much development and not pushing any development are two different things, and it seems like Mercedes has understood that only by doing this will they be able to slowly but surely close the gap heading into the 2025 season. I'm not saying that 2024 shouldn't be competitive, quite the contrary. Their car looks powerful and it's quite revolutionary when you take a look at it, but if the gap that Red Bull made is too far ahead in the past couple of years, then all Mercedes could hope for is a closer 2025 championship battle. This will be restricted by the fact that Hamilton won't be present on the team, and whoever would replace him would of course have some big shoes to fill, something that Wolff has emphasized as well. Still, nothing is dubbed impossible by the technical director of the team, and when talking about what has changed on the car in order to compete with Red Bull, Allison said, "When we talk about a change to the layout, we are generally referring to the position of the engine in the chassis, the geometry of the rear suspension within the gearbox, and the changes to be made in the area where the rider rides. These are all things that are hypothetically doable even during the year, but have such a huge cost opportunity that you never take them into consideration. Therefore, decisions are made in the previous summer anyway. Then, during the off-season, you use the tools in the factory to see that you are taking the right path." But then again, Mercedes would have to be very careful with both of its drivers in the 2024 season, as it's the last one in which they will be teammates. So the fact that Hamilton left the Silver Arrows headed into the 2025 season only goes to show that there isn't that much hope he has to win his 8th championship with Mercedes. Ferrari gave him everything he could have desired, and the only thing that's left to see is whether or not the Maranello team will have a competitive outlet in their hands with which they could fight up front. With all this in mind, do you think that Mercedes will be catching up to Red Bull in 2024? Let us know what you think in the comments below. We'll see you in the next video.